Hello, I'm Linda Press Wolfe, and welcome to another episode of A Conversation With. Our show is dedicated to featuring photographers, local artists, authors, and people in the community that have some way made a difference in our hometown. Today I'll be talking with Frank Prete. Frank's a successful author of mystery novels and a longtime resident of Lewisboro. We'll be talking about three of his published books: Gordian Weave, Secrets to No One, First Rays of a New Rising Sun, and soon to be published, God's Gold. It's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you
welcome.
very much. Thank you for inviting me to your Conversations With. I think you and your staff do a great job with this show. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, as a longtime resident of Lewisboro, I'm always curious, what drew you here to this town of Lewisboro?
It's a very short story. My wife and I just took a drive up here. We came through 121 through Bedford, and we passed the reservoir, and I just loved the way it looked. And we drove into this complex, and there was a unit for sale. We wrote a check, and the rest has been history. We just love every minute here. It's a beautiful area to be in.
And how long ago was that? How long have you lived here?
About 23 years or so.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Now, you haven't been a writer your entire professional life. You were doing something else before you started writing. What were you doing for a living?
Well, for the last 10 years, I was working for an agency. We used to do direct mail for nonprofits, which I liked that because I always felt that we were doing something for the local communities, raising money for their specific charities rather than just working for a plain old corporation.
And when did you make the transition from direct marketing to writing?
Well, I had been writing for years. Even though I was working, I was still writing, and I would work a 9-to-5 job, and I would write. And I would put, after work, I'd put in 4, 5, 6 hours. And on the weekends, I would write Saturday, Sunday, 10, 12 hours, and I just kept writing.
That's a long day.
It was a long day, and that's when I was writing. And I wasn't writing every day, but when I was in the middle of writing a book, and I just had tunnel vision with it, and I just went ahead and did it.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you more inspired during the daytime hours, or were you more of a night owl and writing evenings?
It was always on my mind. I mean, even if I was working, there was always something on my mind. If something popped into my head, I'd jot a little note down and came back, and then just at night just wrote it down.
Now, what got you interested in writing?
That's a long story. As a boy growing up in the Bronx, I used to go to the movies quite a bit. And there were two theaters where I lived that were in walking distance. One was the Wakefield Theater, the other was the Laconia Theater. And as a boy, 9, 10, 11 years old, I used to go to the movies, and I used to love watching the actors. I used to love watching Paul Muni, Betty Davis, James Cagney, Burt Lancaster. And I just loved watching these stars. I mean, they were just they were godlike to me. And then as time went on, even 11, 12 years old, I started listening to the words they were saying. And I became interested in the written word. And I would pay attention to the word and who were the screenplay writers. And I used to love I.A.L. Diamond, Izzy Diamond, Ernest Lehman, Bud Schulberg, Waldo Salt, Dalton Trumbo, and Rod Serling, and Patty Chayefsky. As an aside, Patty Chayefsky and Burt Lancaster and I attended the same high school. And at one point, I was in a high school class with my English teacher, who was very well known in DeWitt Clinton. His name was Louis Katz. And even if you didn't have Louis Katz as an English teacher, you just knew of him. He was very much into movies, very much into the theater and the arts. And when we used to have like a senior day, he would write a script and he would perform it in the auditorium, you know, something akin to a Saturday Night Live skit. Mm-hmm. And one day in class, he was talking about movies, and he happened to mention Burt Lancaster, who apparently he taught had as a student. And I'll never forget this. He pointed to me and said, "Burt Lancaster sat in your seat." And as a teenager, and just who I always idolized Burt Lancaster, as a matter of fact still do, I was just in seventh heaven with that. So listening to the spoken word in movies, I think, brought me to writers. And then when I left high school, I went to work for the Associated Press. And there, obviously, I was around reporters and writers. And at that time, I was around writers like Peter Arnett, Bill Glover, who used to be the theater critic. I don't know who the movie critic was. I think he filed out of Los Angeles. I never met him. But then I also got to meet Nick Pileggi. Nick Pileggi and I were friends, and we would talk about writing. And also Tom Harris. Tom Harris and I used to spend hours talking. And Tom Harris, in my opinion, wrote one of the best villains since Dracula, and that was Hannibal Lecter. Mm-hmm. And Tom and I used to talk for hours about the things that he was writing. And at that point, I was attending college, and I was writing some poetry and short stories for the college newspaper. But Tom was a little bit more into his writing. And I think at the time, he may have started writing Black Sunday, which was his first book. But we would talk about his writing, but never really about the struggle of writing. And then I remember Jimmy Breslin used to come up, and I think at the time he was writing an article for the Post. And he used to come up and sometimes use these offices at the Associated Press to write his column. And I used to think that, well, he was maybe out at the 21 Club and getting his stories for his column, much like Burt Lancaster did it in Sweet Smell of Success with Tony Curtis. And I used to see him, and he used to sit, and he used to type a little bit, and then he used to wring his hands together, put his heads down in his hands, and rub his temples. And I thought he had nervous tics. And then what happened then is I started getting into my writing, and one day I had trouble with something, writing a specific sentence, and I remember rubbing my hands together and rubbing my hands through my hair, and the image of Jimmy Breslin came into my mind, and it was at that moment that I understood the struggle it takes to create. And Stephen Sondheim said it best, art is hard, and I think it is. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. And I would imagine that it takes an enormous amount of discipline to be a dedicated writer. And so do you have certain practices or routines that you get into when you want to get through a day's worth of writing or an evening's worth of writing?
I just do it. I just put it in my mind, this is what I'm going to do, and that's my ethic. I just do it. Mm-hmm. And the ideas propel me to do it. It's like I can't break away from it. I've got to do it.
Do you struggle with writer's block every once in a while?
I'd hate to tell you how many times I looked at a blank page. I'm not talking for hours, I'm talking days. But you just deal with it. It's part of it. I realize it, and I just try to relax. I try to bring in whatever energies that give me that writing to begin with, and I just go with it, and I trust in it.
Sounds like there were quite a few people that influenced you to start writing. And are there some authors today that you enjoy reading that you're particularly fond of, or authors that you may have met that also influenced your writing?
Don DeLillo comes to mind. He, to me, he's at the top. And I did get a chance to meet him at a book signing in the city about a year or so ago. And I had been waiting like 10 years to meet him, and then I finally got to meet him, and it was really nice. Ursula Heggie, another one of my favorite writers. There's a slew of writers that I really, really enjoy.
Now, you've published 3 books, with a 4th one soon to be published.
Yes, God's Gold.
What are some of the things that influenced the theme of your books, or the content or the characters?
I think the main theme in all my writing is abuse of power. And I have a certain sense of justice, and I deal with abuse of power, whether it's a serial killer who is very strong, like in First Rays of a New Rising Sun, and or it's a corporation that is abusing their power. I'm opposed to abuse of power. I'm opposed to tyranny, and I have a sense of justice. And in all my stories, the people who were less likely to beat down these powerful people or serial killers, they come to the fore and they do it.
So we'll find that in this is your first book?
That was First Rays of New Rising Sun is the first book, correct.
Find that, and the second one, Secrets to No One.
Oh, actually, no, it was Gordian Weave and then Secrets to No One, yes.
And I'm just curious, and I wondered what the term, what the title means.
Well, it's taken from the Gordian knot, and all my mystery novels there, I have text and subtext, and there's always something else that's going on. It's just not one chase or one topic, and so it was kind of complex, and it was a Gordian weave type of situation, and the main protagonist, who was a Sheriff Joseph St. Cloud, he shatters the Gordian weave, if you will.
And Secrets to No One, I understand, is set in Iraq.
No, God's Gold is set in Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, it's set in Iraq, in Monte Carlo. I use different locations. My protagonist kind of travel the world.
Oh, that makes for interesting backdrops
Yeah, it really
for
is.
your works.
Yeah.
As a writer, do you dedicate minimum hours per day that you want to make sure that you're sitting at the desk writing? And do you write on the computer or longhand?
Both. I write longhand, and then I transcribe it to the computer, and I write till I drop. Or until I'm called to dinner, whatever.
Now, your book soon to be published, God's Gold, that's possibly being considered for film?
Well, we don't know yet. We're in the process of just trying to get it into the right publisher's hands and just see what happens from there. But you know, Linda, I don't really attach to that ending. In the beginning, I used to, but now my main focus is just doing the work. Once that's done, that's my accomplishment. That's what I focus on. If anything happens after that, well, then so be it. Then the universe is kind.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit to maybe people or places that influenced you to write. And when we were talking earlier, I think you mentioned meeting Robert Klein locally.
He went to DeWitt Clinton, as I did, and
that's a high school in the Bronx?
DeWitt Clinton. Yeah, DeWitt Clinton. And we were I was at Caramore one night, and happened we were going backstage to see. Matter of fact, the singer at that time was Marilyn Horne, and we were online going backstage. She was greeting certain people, and I happened to be standing next to Robert Klein. And I didn't know him at the time, but I know he had gone to my alma mater. And I just leaned over and I said to him, "Louis Katz said hello." So he turned and he smiled and he said, "DeWitt Clinton, right?" And we had a little bit of a chat about DeWitt Clinton. So it corroborates what I said. Anybody who went to DeWitt Clinton knew Louis Katz. And he was an influence on me as well in my writing. That was probably one of my first influences, because we'd have to write book reports and such, and he would critique them, really critique them. So he was an influence to me. Yes, he was.
I think having those positive influences in one's life really helps you to become an outstanding writer. So as a successful author, what would you tell our listeners as to some advice you might offer them if they're thinking about writing or starting out a writing career?
I would suggest just do it. Give yourself no excuses and just do it. It's as simple as that. And I think what happens to me also is that when I write, I also discover how I feel and how I think about the different things. So for any writer out there, I believe that's what you will discover. And self-discovery is a great thing.
Now you have two children, grown children, right? Son and daughter. Are any one of them or both of them interested in following in Dad's footsteps and becoming a writer?
Actually, my son is a published author. He wrote a book, Say That to My Face. As a matter of fact, he's teaching down in Memphis, Tennessee, and he just did a one-man show. I believe the name of the show was All God's Creatures, and he was just on a local television station down there. He was in New York. He just moved down there and still doing his acting and his writing. And my daughter lives not far from me, and she's in her own business. She does chocolates. She makes chocolates that are no refined sugars, and she's an entrepreneur in her own right. And she works very hard, and I wish her well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.